changes will we see in U.S. tariffs and trade policy? Dan Schwartz is a principal in the customs and trade practice of Crow LLP. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Bob.
Good to see you again. Thank you for being with me today. So,
Likewise.
Dan, what can we expect from the Trump administration on the tariff front specifically in the coming year? How much and against whom?
Well, on the campaign trail, President Trump has talked about imposing anywhere between a 10 to 20% across the board tariff on all imports coming into the United States, but a carve out, particularly for China, where he's looking at a potential 50 to 60% tariff on Chinese imports.
Mm-hmm. So that's everything coming into the United States, even from our so-called friendly trading partners.
Well, of course, there'll be exclusions and exemptions, I'm sure, written into this, and there'll probably be certain products or even companies are receive some consideration from the Trump administration. But yeah, we're looking at really a transformative presidency if he does follow through with what he's been talking about on the campaign trail. It's going to be a big departure from what we've really seen during the last 60 to 70 years.
What would be the basis for some exclusions from these tariffs?
One of the big, criteria that we've looked at with the tariffs that have been rolled out previously had been really around the idea of that type of product not being eligible or being available in the U.S. marketplace, that there is nowhere else to turn to other than China for this particular product. And that's largely been the basis for a lot of these exclusions that have been granted.
But other than that, across the board, industry-wise, I mean, we know automotive is always an issue. We know high tech, we know solar panels, but even like basic everyday consumer goods would be subject to this as well, right?
Yeah, consumer goods in many respects have not felt the full impact of the Trump tariffs dating back in 2018. I don't think they're going to be able to escape it this go around. We're seeing obviously a lot of statements are coming out from differing lobbying groups out there representing the retail industry, the apparel industry, all talking about what their particular positions are on where they think this tariff action should go. But we're also seeing, I think, on Capitol Hill, a lot of bipartisanship on the issue, particularly of China trade. There are bills that are being introduced looking at removing the de minimis provision for Chinese imports. There's also provisions that are being introduced to remove apparel and footwear and textiles from de minimis altogether. Looking at even removing Russia from de minimis. There's been an explosion of these shipments that are coming in. The small, low value, high volume shipments are coming into the United States that are causing a real strain on the customs service. And it's really been used as a vehicle, particularly for e-commerce, to get around the China tariffs. They've effectively pushed out their distribution platform from having a DC in the United States to now pushing out their DC operations in China and basically sending in millions of small parcels into places like Louisville and Memphis and Anchorage, the big hubs for FedEx and UPS. And it's caused really quite a strain on the customs service as a result.
Beyond the actual intent of the de minimis limit anyway, it's not going necessarily direct to consumers, but appears to be in many cases. And of course, that de minimis figure right now, $800, anything below $800 in value shipped in within the course of a single day, not subject to any tariffs. So you're seeing either an elimination altogether or a reduction back to a lower number. What do you think? Could be anything, right?
Everything I'm reading, hearing, and talking to people about, there's really no mention about revising the actual de minimis dollar amount again. They seem to be focused on wholesale cutting out trade from China or particular groups of products like textile and apparel products from de minimis provision. So I don't know if we're going to see the actual dollar amount change here in the future, but I think more likely than not, we're just going to see China removed altogether from it.
Yeah.
And part of that bipartisanship too, Bob, that we're seeing on Capitol Hill, there's a lot of discussion about removing most favored nation status from China as well. There's pending legislation in Capitol Hill to address that. And again, there's bipartisan support around it. So I think everybody's on the same page in that the era of free trade is come to an end. Doesn't mean globalization is over, but it definitely means that this idea that we're going to open up the United States to China imports without really getting any reciprocity with China for our exports to their market. I think those days are coming to an end, and there's bipartisan support to make sure that happens.
And the implication seems to be that the broader sense of our trade relations with China are just going to get chillier, right? To the point where a lot of companies are going to so-called decouple from China in response to this. This is just a further trend of China becoming less of a factor in U.S. trade generally, do you think?
It will be interesting to see what direction we go. I think the underlying question is what's the higher priority for a Trump administration? Is it to really decouple ourselves from China, or is it to build up our manufacturing base here in the United States? Are they going to use the tariffs as a club and in trying to get the Chinese to the negotiating table and try to work out some sort of trade agreement between the parties? We tried that in 2019 with the phase one deal. They did make some concessions, particularly around intellectual property, but they never fulfilled the main agreement, and that was to increase their purchases of U.S. goods by 200 million, and that never was fulfilled.
Yeah.
So is that going to be, are these tariffs going to be used essentially as a negotiating ploy to get them to the table and for us to work out some sort of agreement? Or are we really going to take these other underlying issues more seriously and really look at China as a national security threat and really look at decoupling ourselves from them? You see what's going on in the South China Sea. We now have the Chinese who are having violent clashes with the Philippines out on the open oceans. They've had a vast buildup of their military that is akin to expansion, effort to expand their empire, not to provide for national defense. So there's some real concern about where is this headed? Are they at some point going to make a move on Taiwan? And you have all the other subsidiary issues with intellectual property rights being stolen, corporate espionage, sending weather balloons over to the United States with sensitive recording information. So what's going to be the heavier weight here? Is it going to be really trade, or is it going to be national security? And I don't know if we have a firm answer on that yet.
Just turning real quickly to another topic, what do you think is going to happen under the Trump administration to the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, which is up for review in 2026?
Yeah, that's right. It's up for review in 2026. So far, as I understand it, incoming Trump administration has received rather a cold welcome from the Mexican authorities so far. Mexico is going through quite a few changes themselves. They've recently had a new election. They've have a new president who's been described as being left of Bernie Sanders. And the country as a whole is going through some significant judicial reforms as well. That's making a lot of multinational corporations who have a lot of assets in Mexico a little bit nervous. And I think there's a lot of people who were involved in that renegotiation of NAFTA who've now walked away from it and realized that we could have done a better job, particularly for our automotive industry, in representing their interest in the agreement. So do I see that there's a future for USMCA? Yeah, I can see a future, but I think getting to some renegotiation in 2026. I think it's going to be difficult. And I think there will probably be some disruption to trade potentially as a result.
At the same time, we're seeing an upsurge in manufacturing in Mexico in the nearshoring trend, and especially in automotive. So that's going to be interesting how that plays out against the USMCA. Well, thank you so much. Always good to talk to you, Dan, about just briefly bringing us up to date on what we might expect to see in tariff and trade policy in the coming year and beyond under the new administration. Thanks for being with me today. Do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Bob.